Yes. Yes, beautiful. Beautiful, my brothers. Oh, I love the horse head. Oh, dear Lord, what am I? What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in for Trove. Yeah, Trove. Okay, sorry. Today we're going to be talking about the Revenant. How are you going to end up building this character from mid to end game? This is a long overdue tutorial. Oh boy, is it long overdue. Now, the thing about the Revenant that you guys might not know is that this is probably one of the only characters in the entire game that can end up being a tank. I mean, save for like Tomb Raiser and Draco and other characters, but Revenant is just really, really good at surviving, because if you didn't know, it actually has an innate ability to lifesteal. So that's, you can essentially just keep yourself alive no matter what. This was apparent way back when Shadow Towers first ended up introducing the Hydra bosses. That's where it was already really good to use the Revenant, because you could basically out-survive all of these bosses. Even Dreadnought was like a difficult thing back in the day, believe it or not, and Revenant could solo it, whereas nowadays, you know, that kind of survivability just isn't really that good comparatively to trying to deal more damage, because the way that Trove's endgame works is essentially you either are dealing enough damage that you can kill the enemy before they can take enough flasks out of you, or you have so much survivability that you can last long enough to kill the enemy. That's basically how Trove's endgame damage works in a nutshell. Why is this guy teleporting up and down? It's scaring me. But anyways, let's move on and let's get into it. So the main abilities that you're going to be doing with this guy, obviously your ultimate ability is going to end up being helpful for sure, but generally you're going to go into battle, tap your number 1, turn on your spears, and then use your base attack, and that's where all of your damage is going to end up coming from with this guy. The shield bash is basically useless. You just don't use it, and you know, just the devs, please make it so that all of these other abilities can end up taking advantage of attack speed, please. Not every single one of them needs to. Obviously, Spirit Spears would just be broken, but I mean, come on, man. It would definitely make a lot of these other abilities that are useless actually useful. But anyways, so we're going to be moving on to the subclass ability. Subclass ability is, you know, no ifs, ands, or buts. You're basically just going to use sort of crazy lunacy ability just because it makes you go big, and when you trigger lunacy mode, it just gives you a huge burst of damage. If you want more movement speed, you can go for mounted cavalry, just because it's kind of a standard issue. Like, okay, you have consistent movement speed over your mounts, whatever. Otherwise, the Solarian subclass ability is always going to end up being really good just because of the extra light value, but generally speaking, you're probably focusing on sort of crazy as your main ability. Now, for your stats, you're going to end up going for movement speed, attack speed, because, you know, that's the whole point of the character, is you want to end up having as much attack speed as possible, because your base attack deals a lot more damage than you would think in combination with the Spirit Spears. And the movement speed is just because this class just has such a sheer amount of bad, slow. He's slow and sluggish and fat. I mean, look at him. He's a giant crab, dude. He's probably delicious. But if you want to end up leaning more on the side of damage, you would move that movement speed off of your gear in favor of crit damage as the substat instead. Now, for the hidden ring effects, we're going to go through these together, because there are a couple options. There's speed spears. So Spirit Spears no longer slow the Revenant, so you could actually be moving at your normal movement speed while you pull out your Spirit Spears. Probably going to be your best bet for just normal farming if you're using this guy for that. Spirit Squad, so Spirit Storm, your ultimate, summons a group of tiny Spirit Wraiths, which is pretty good. And then Vengeful Storm, so when at low health, Spirit Storm is triggered automatically, and it specifically says it has a long cooldown. So all of these abilities end up having a internal cooldown for sure, but you kind of got options. Well, namely 2. You end up having the Spirit Storm summoning tiny Wraith Spirits. That's going to be pretty decent in terms of giving you extra damage, because, you know, the allies are going to end up helping you out with that. However, if you're just doing normal farming and you're not too worried about that extra damage, that's where I would use the Speed Spears, just so that you can keep that movement speed up. That is always going to end up being one of the biggest priorities for endgame stuff, especially if you're speed farming. Not that this character can speed farm per se. Your time to kill in dungeons is really quick, but traveling from dungeon to dungeon can end up being quite slow if you don't have a good knight subclass ability or what have you. But anyways, the banner, you know, I always just use the Nitro banner just because it's the standard. Otherwise, the best banners in the game are always going to end up being the torches from Leviathans. There's the daily torch, the weekly torch, and then, of course, the very, 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 very rare permatorch or permanent torch, which is a torch that can end up dropping from Leviathans that will never despawn, and you can actually craft that torch into a better torch at the Crystology crafting table that is at the hub in Geode Surface. But anyways, moving on to the ally. Your allies are going to obviously be the physical based ones, so you can use Animated Jug because of the sheer movement speed that you get out of it, and then otherwise Jingles is going to have the decreased cooldown, which maybe if you want to end up using the ult a lot more, again, this would be your damage, damage build versus the attack speed and movement speed build, or well, movement speed specifically. Your other alternatives is Raptor Berserker, and then the other one, what was the arrow one? Yeah, there it is. The Golden Horde Dragonling, I suppose. I mean, generally speaking, this is a really easy ally to get if you can't get your hands on the Delve ones, which are obviously going to end up being the better option. I'm probably missing whichever is the equivalent of the cooldown ally for a physical character, but that's what I would pick. Anyways, it doesn't really matter that much. Same with food, that doesn't matter either. Just take the food that gives you the most light value. So for your emblems, again, this is all depending on where you're at in the game and how you're actually trying to use the character. You can end up using Sure Strike emblem if you are suffering in the crit hit department, and then otherwise you can use Chromatic if you really want to end up going towards that damage ult combo. But again, generally speaking, you're just going to be doing a lot of damage with the Spirit Spears and your base attack anyways. Unyielding will give you survivability, which you don't need too much on the Revenant, just because that life steal is so darn good. Martial Emblem is a must, and then if you can, Trailblazing, just because that extra movement speed is going to make much more of a difference than you would think. For the Flask themselves, Death Defying is kind of the standard that I always suggest, but frankly speaking, you could actually get away with not using Death Defying just because the survivability of this character is insane. He's one of the very rare ones that can, just because he'll actually out-heal enemies that are one-shotting you. Not always. I don't know how good it's going to end up being at U11 per se, but you could end up using Vial of Unleashed Power if you are strictly building towards using your ult. Conjurer's Crucible is going to be another must-have option, just because it'll end up allowing you to deal with dungeons for a longer period of time, because you'll refill flasks on Magic Find trigger. But again, you can always experiment. I always just use Death Defying just because it's the easiest one, because I don't have to think about anything, right? So now let's move on to the stat values before we move on to the gems. So these are going to be the suggested stats for mid-game, and then you just kind of inflate those numbers for later on. Basically, you're going to be focusing on your physical damage at 80,000 at the minimum, your crit hit 50% at the minimum. Anything higher than that is going to be better than nothing, because obviously you are trying to focus on getting as close to 100% as possible. And then your crit damage you want to end up having at 800%, again at the minimum. So anything higher than those values is going to end up slowly bringing you from mid-tier into the end game. Now, as far as my gems are concerned, I'm going to swap to my Shadow Hunter because it's the only character I have a fully maxed out set of crystal gems, and the only gems that I have are physical anyways, so the stat values will not lie. However, just keep in mind that if you have stellar or radiant gems, it's going to be the exact same thing, just your stats are going to be significantly lower, and you'll just end up having to go to a different area in order to farm. It doesn't make much of a difference to have the crystal gems other than more numbers. So for the Cosmic Empower gem, Berserk Battler is going to be your best option for Revenant, just because of the fact that it gives you more damage, because it gives you more light value, which is basically armor penetration in this game for the late game enemies. And as we mentioned previously, you don't really need any survivability on the class. Now, if you want to become invincible, you could be using Vampirium, just because that gives you life steal as well. And so that, combined with your Spirit Spears and everything, just constantly proccing it all the time, like you will not die. It'll be very, very difficult for you to die. The stats that you're going to be focusing on for all of your cosmic gems are going to be 3 pearls light, no pearls physical damage and crit damage, and then your top priority is to augment the light stat first, because light is going to be one of the most important stats that is unanimously across the board going to benefit every single character that you have. Okay, so your empowered gems, these are going to be slightly different. Pyrodisc is going to be kind of the must-have, just because that movement speed that you get from Pyrodisc is just kind of a standard. Because if you're ever going to end up maining these characters for more than just where their strongest point is, so Revenant's case would be he's really, really good in the Delves, he's decent as a boss killer, not as good at speed farming just because of that lack of movement speed. And that's where Pyrodisc can kind of compensate for that a little bit, not too much. But Pyrodisc, Cubic Curtain will give you more survivability as if you need it. Stun bursts, you know, generally speaking, it's not really that big of a deal what the other empowered gems are. Like, I don't really bother. Now, the stats on the empowered gems are all going to end up being the same. So 2 pearls physical damage, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearls crit hit. And then your lesser gems are going to essentially be a 3/3 ratio. So this is the easiest way that I can end up explaining it to you guys so that you can digest this information as quickly as and efficiently as possible, but you don't have to follow this to the letter. So 3 of your lesser gems are going to end up being the exact same stats. So 2 pearls physical, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearls crit hit. And then the other 3 lesser gems, because there's a total of 6, are going to end up being 2 pearls crit damage, 1 pearl physical, no pearls crit hit. And any extra crit hit you have over 100%, you can cycle that stat into maximum health, which you will be able to have quite a bit of max health on your Vanguard. Do I keep saying Vanguard? I mean Revenant. Jeez. I hope that wasn't the only time that I ended up saying Vanguard instead of Revenant. I'm going to have to notice that in editing. But anyways, you obviously want to end up... Actually, no, you don't want to have your class gem ability. That's kind of standard. Doesn't really matter, does it? Yeah, because it's got to do with your shield bash. I mean, you can get this if you really want to. Generally speaking, it's a free gem. So that, you know, and it's a lot easier to get a class gem at crystal quality rather than the other ones that you would have to upgrade or just grind from U11. So, yeah. I mean, that's entirely up to you whether you want it or not, because I don't know. I mean, I guess it's better than not. Just because at least it makes the shield bash do something, even if not really much of anything. But yeah, that's going to end up doing it for me today, ladies and gentlemen. So if there's anything that I ended up missing, you can sound off in the comments down below. But otherwise, for the most part, I think we did everything we could. So smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel. Gonna be spamming you guys with more tutorials over this week. And yeah, hope you have a wonderful day.